Welcome to Turning the Page. I'm host Donnie Morse of Confetti Antiques and Books. And today we are pleased to have James Dark with us, who is the curator of the BYU Motion Picture Archive. James, welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here, Donnie. Thank you.
Today we're here speaking about James' book that just came out, When Hollywood Came to Town, A History of Movie Making in Utah. Now, lots of people know that lots of movies are made in Utah, but to actually have a record or a list of those is kind of unique. Was there a previous work done on this?
There has never been anything done on this topic, and the reason I started it is I was just as curious as all of you might be.
When did movie making start in Utah then?
Well, actual movie making in Utah started in the early 1900s, the way a lot of movie making did around the country. They were homegrown industries. My book is on when Hollywood first came to Utah, and that began in 1924 with a Tom Mix Western called The Deadwood Coach.
And where was that done at?
Cedar City.
Cedar City.
Cedar City, Bryce Canyon, Kanab, all these beautiful locations, Cedar Breaks. But the sad fact of the matter is, as is the case with many of these films, The Deadwood Coach is a lost film. The film disintegrates, no copies exist, and they're gone. Only a handful of photographs document where it was shot. Those photographs are in the book.
Really? So a lot of movies from that time frame are just gone?
Yes, because in those days, in the 1920s and early 30s, there wasn't a concept of re-releasing movies. And so the effective lifespan of a movie was very short. There was no economic incentive to preserve them, so many of them just rotted in the vaults. And we don't have many of them anymore. In fact, there is an estimate by the American Film Institute that of all the films made from the early 1900s up to the dawn of sound, probably 70% are gone.
Wow. So that's your job then as curator, is to try to find those, bring them together, save them?
That's correct. And as an author, my job is to track down any information that can document these films, both the films that we have and those that are lost. But that's what compelled me to write this history. It's slipping away. And the people who were there at the time these movies were made, many of those I interviewed from the book have since passed away. And their reminiscences about what was filmed, where it was filmed, and what impact did it have on local communities like Grafton or Rockville or St. George or Kanab or Moab, they're in the book. And it's, to me, it's a compelling story. And to sort of twist the title of a feature film that was made in Utah, to me, the story of Hollywood movie making in Utah is really the greatest story never told until now.
Until now. In your book, When Hollywood Came to Town, A History of Movie Making in Utah. I found it very interesting, the Perry brothers. Tell us a little bit about the Perry brothers from Cedar City.
You know, these are some of the most exciting people you'd ever meet. Chauncey, Gronway, and Whit Perry were from Salt Lake, went down to Cedar City as young men on the make in the 19-teens, and they ran a hotel, they ran a steam cleaning operation, and they snagged the transportation concession to Zion National Park before it was a national park. And they would drive tourists down to Grand Canyon, up to Bryce Canyon. And there was a great agricultural depression in Utah during all of the 1920s. And not many people know that. So that the stock market crash of '29 wasn't as big of a shock to Utahns when it occurred. Anyway, Chauncey Perry, who was a World War I pilot, got the idea that he would fly his airplane over Zion Canyon, Bryce Canyon, and Grand Canyon, take pictures, and then during the slow season in winter, he would take a train down to LA, visit the movie studios, and try and interest the movie companies to come up and film movies in that area. Well, in 1924, his efforts paid off, and he got the Fox Film Corporation to send Tom Mix, who was the reigning Western star of the 1920s, to come up to Cedar City to make The Deadwood Coach. And boy, did it make news. When the train came into the station, the American Legion post were all mounted on their horses, greeted him. They wanted him to be the host of the Iron County Rodeo. The movie was made. The newspapers covered it all. They said this was the biggest thing since President Harding visited Zion Canyon the year before. And from that point forward, the movie companies came, and they came again and again and again, and the Perrys founded the Perry Lodge in Kanab, which is now legendary. And more than 100 movies were made in Kane County and the surrounding areas from 1924 to 1978. That is an astonishing, unique story. In fact, in my research, no other small town the size of Kanab or Cedar City had as close a relationship with the Hollywood studios and had as many films made in it than Kanab or Cedar City or St. George, of any place in the United States. That's what makes Utah's movie-making story so unique. And that's why Utahns ought to have considerable pride in this story. It is unlike any other state in the Union. And it's our story. And I was surprised it had never been told before.
I agree. When I picked up your book and I saw it, and I actually met you through my daughter who works at BYU in the special collections, and she told me about your book and about your research, and I'm like, I've got to get this guy on my program. I've got to get his book in my shop, because it really is a fascinating look at Utah history, and it's all things that we're all familiar with. Butch Cassidy and Sundance. We all kind of knew the movie was made here, but exactly where and when, and it's just kind of neat to see that kind of history actually written down for us to study.
I attempted to write the kind of book that I would want to read, so that when you read something about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, I know a lot about the movie, and there are a lot of books that talk about the movie as a Western. I wanted to find out, what did a waitress in Dick's Cafe in St. George think when Paul Newman, Robert Redford, the director, walked in, sat down, and had their regular meals at the restaurant? You'll find out in the book. And in Kanab, and in Moab, and in Salt Lake, how did the locals react? How did it change their life? And how did rank-and-file Utahns impact the life of these movie makers? That's the story that's never been told before. And frankly, the more I researched this book, and it took over 30 years to do it, the more excited I got to do it. Some projects you get going, and after a while it peaks and you run out of steam and say,
Yes.
this isn't that. I'm too tired. I don't want to do this anymore. I just got more and more interested. The more films I found out were made in the state, and the more people I met who had encountered the filmmakers or were extras themselves in these movies. That's what kept me going for more than 30 years. And so it was finally time to get it out in book form and tell people a story that most people have no idea occurred in this state.
James, we're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the movie that I was in. And this is Turning the Page. I'm host Donnie Morse. We'll be right back.